Good evening, everyone. I'm Tammy Kornfeld, Ohel's Director of Marketing and Communications. We're glad you could join us for this evening's TheraZoom, Kids, COVID, and Camping, Managing Anxiety as Kids Return to Camp. Ohel has been offering these TheraZoom webinars for more than a year now. They've been just one of the ways that we've transitioned our services during a very traumatic time. It's always been Ohel's mission to care for the emotional, developmental, and mental health needs of our community. And we made sure, even at the height of the crisis, that we maintained all our services over Zoom where possible and in person where needed and necessary. And as the world begins to open up again, we look forward to seeing more and more of our in-person services come back. We care for thousands of individuals through our broad range of programs, including those for people with disabilities, older adult services, outpatient counseling for everyday people with everyday problems, and trauma resources for communities in New York and across the country. I'd like to acknowledge UJA Federation of New York for their support of Ohel's work during COVID. And now just a little housekeeping before we begin. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website in about a week. A number of questions have been submitted, but we'd be happy to take some more, and you can just put those into either the chat or the Q&A, and we will take them after the presenters finish speaking. We hope that our webinar will be just about an hour long. Finally, we ask you to complete a short questionnaire that will appear in your browser after the webinar is completed, and that will help us to know what we need to do in the future for topics that interest you. And now I'm pleased to welcome our panelists this evening. Dr. Mark Kirshenbaum is Ohel's medical consultant and a pediatrician in private practice. He'll speak about what to expect at camp from a medical perspective. Dr. Norman Blumenthal, Ohel Zachter Family Chair in Trauma and Crisis Counseling, will speak about how to get your child ready emotionally for camp after so much time back and forth between in-home school, in-person school, and every hybrid model in between. And Kaylie Namdar is the Director of Middle School Guidance at Hebrew Academy of Long Beach and the Psychologist at Ohel's Camp Kaylie. She has spent summers immersed in girls camping, and we're happy that she can use her expertise to help us understand the challenges that our children will face this summer. We begin with Dr. Kirschenbaum.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Very much appreciated. So yeah, we've been doing these TheraZoom sessions over the last year, and I've really gotten quite a bit out of it. It sort of helps me kind of relay the message that I do throughout the day, speaking to parents, and sort of try to make it a little bit more concise and easier for parents to digest in a meaningful way. And at the same time, give you guys the opportunity to ask questions at the end of it, if there are any. So that would be really helpful. And it definitely helps me get my point across, our point across as a group when questions come at the end. So we definitely do encourage them. From a medical standpoint, when we talk about coronavirus, it's been a long time coming, but thankfully we are sitting where we are today, where nationally the numbers, the amount of positives that are coming in are significantly decreasing, and it's for a variety of different reasons, but predominantly it's because of the vaccine and the success there of it. And tonight, as those numbers, something we discussed as a panel coming into tonight's meeting was this idea that every week that goes on further, the numbers keep on decreasing. When I say the numbers, it's the amount of positives. And more importantly for me as a pediatrician, it's I'm not really seeing so much of the mortality. It's of people actually dying. It's more the morbidity of the amount of people getting sick from coronavirus. And that's been decreasing significantly. I'd say for the last 2 months, I've been seeing a steady decline in those numbers. So as we get closer to camp, the question is always going to be, why are we even talking about it as we get closer? And it's a good question. As we're seeing less cases, why are we even discussing it still? And what I've found amongst parents that I come across on a daily basis and the young children themselves, meaning the kids who are actually attending camps this summer, the fear and anxiety is still very much present and real to them. So although I can say as a doctor that statistics are driving my ease and letting things go, and the CDC and every single medical community, a lot of the feel safe protocols that we put in place are becoming not as necessary. At the same time, children and adults at the same time have a hard time transitioning and allowing some of those gatekeepers that we had in place earlier to sort of ease those going forward. And I'd like to address those. But before we even get there, it's just important from a number standpoint. Those numbers are definitely steadily decreasing. There's some recent papers that just came out from JAMA that were, to me, astounding. Ever since we got the vaccine, at this point, 60% of all Americans have been vaccinated, which to me is, I know we had, there was a different number that was put out recently, that there was different numbers that we wanted to meet. But if someone told me that before the summer, I'd be reaching even 60% of all Americans, I think that would be pretty significant. And since those vaccines came out, we definitely have seen a steadily decreasing numbers of those coming down. Now, as we enter camp and as numbers are decreasing, camps have been preparing, and every different camp has different protocols. And I would argue that there is no right or wrong protocol today. There's the CDC came out with their guidelines. I have my personal feelings about it. And I've heard different protocols from many different camps over the last, I'd say 2 to 4 weeks. Different people have been rolling out different plans. And I have a hard time saying that one plan is better or worse or safer or less safe than another plan. They're different, certainly. And I think that the most important message that I'd like to tell you guys is that as parents sending kids to camp, grandparents that are having grandchildren going to camp, it's more important that you're aware of those protocols prior to going to camp. What we don't want is surprises. And I feel like that's when we run into trouble. And that we saw last summer as well, when we feel like camps are, or any institution, it could be a school, it can be a social hall, whatever it may be, where people are getting together in group-like sessions. What are the protocols before you send your child to that environment is really important, and that you need to be okay with those protocols prior to sending your child. The last thing we would like that to me, as someone who consults for camps, the worst case scenario for me is sort of the surprise of the protocols when something does happen. So sort of well-versing yourself, and that definitely limits the anxiety going into camp. And as long as you and your child are aware of what the protocols of that particular camp is beforehand, I find that to be very, very helpful. With the CDC came out their guidelines, there was a discussion regarding cohorts. I mean, it's one of the longer guidelines that are put out by the CDC. Very difficult to go through the nitty gritty of the details. My take home from all those guidelines would be every camp can make their own guidelines as long as there are guidelines. So if you're sending your child to camp, know that there are going to be some local policies in place. Every single state, city, town will have their own particular guidelines. And the camps, in order to open, will need to abide by those guidelines as to the best of their capabilities. That was one take-home message. And the second take-home message is that, if possible, to be as safe as possible. Now, we know that many of our summer camps, a lot of the recommendations that they made aren't really possible. And I think for those of us that were discussing some of the protocols that we put into place in Camp Kaylie, what came out quite often was that it is impossible to cohort. We can't have different bunks being separate from each other all day long. It's when you have communal areas like a shul, lunchroom, rec halls, it's near impossible. So that already makes it much more difficult to put into practice a lot of those different protocols that were discussed from those guidelines. Now, again, I'm okay with all guidelines as long as there is a plan in place. And that's really, for me, the most important thing. When we were making those guidelines, and it's something I think it's important for all parents to hear, is that if you feel like your particular child has an underlying condition that would make them more susceptible, or if they were to get COVID virus, they would get sicker than your typical child, then you need to notify the camp in advance. That is not something I would want the camp to have the onus on, to reaching out to the parents, let them know. I would like for parents to take an initiative to reach out to the camp before camp and say, hey, I just want to let you guys know that there's a sibling in the house with something, or the child themselves is at a particular risk to get sicker than your typical child. And the more information, this is why this summer is unique. And that's why I think it's an important, while in other summers, you may not feel comfortable discussing this with your camp, this particular summer, I do believe if there's someone that you trust, part of administration in your camp, just let them know in advance beforehand that if there's even a possibility of someone having coronavirus in camp, or that you'd want to be notified at any special communication that you would like to happen between the camp and administration, now, weeks before camp would be an ideal time to reach out to them. Before I end, again, just sort of my outlook going into the summer with camp, something we've discussed on many of the TheraZooms have been the concept of, risk assessment of, what are the benefits, what are the disadvantages about every decision we make regarding the care and health of our children. And as we enter, summer 2 of coronavirus affecting our, day-to-day, I would say that I feel as a local pediatrician and as someone who's been, I'd say, dealing with coronavirus from the beginning, whether it's, seeing my regular patients or doing testing on the community as a whole, because the numbers are coming down, because the hospitals and the doctors working there have a much better handle on coronavirus now than they did in the past. And I feel like every passing month, we're getting more and more information. And for me personally, it's evidence-based, which makes it much more, the validity of those options are much more robust. I'm comfortable saying that some of the benefits that summer camp gives our children, and by default, the parents, having the house back to themselves a little bit and enabling us to sort of, us as parents, rejuvenate our batteries, the children to be around other children. The benefits of summer camp are just never ending. I can go on and on. I'm sure some of the other presenters will discuss it, but the risk of coronavirus, while it's not, by far, it's not over. I'm not saying that, but the benefits of camp to me are starting to be greater than they were in the past. While last summer, I was much more concerned about coronavirus and its effects on our children and the idea of them bringing them home back to their family. Now that we're a year later, our treatment options are extremely different. We thankfully have some very safe vaccines on the market, readily available to people. I'm not as concerned as the risks from coronavirus. And I think it's important to, whatever anxieties we have going into this year's summer, to remind ourselves that obviously, if you're sending your child to camp, this already, but to sort of solidify it and reaffirm it to ourselves and to our children, to have a good time in camp, to really enjoy our time there, sort of let go a little bit, try not to think about that as much as possible, because we really are essentially, by sending our kids off to summer camp, essentially creating their own bubble. And while they're within that bubble of a community, to really try to get all the benefits as they can out of camp during that particular time, whether it's 1 month or 2 months, whatever it may be, a traveling camp, upstate camp. There are so many benefits to it that I wouldn't want the fears and anxieties of Corona to get in the way of that. I would like all that planning to happen now. Once we give our children a hug and kiss at the bus and we send them off with their luggage and we give them, it should feel like any other summer. And it's critical as we go into that time to sort of, cross our T's and dot our I's now, and have our conversations with our children now. I wouldn't want that to happen during camp, the first week of camp. I would, as a pediatrician, it would break my heart to hear of parents of, is anyone sick in your bunk? Is anyone coughing? No, it's okay. We have to go through that now. We have to sort of make peace with the fact that we're not going to see our child, and we can't control every variable while they're in sleepaway camp. And whatever we can control, do it now. And then once we go into our camp, trust the system. The same way we trust our camp administration to take care of their physical well-being and mental well-being while in camp. We also have to trust them that their medical knowledge and the people that they have in place are people the same way we trust them to feed them, the right foods and make sure they're sleeping at night and everything's happening the way we would like it happen to our own personal homes. As we let go as well with coronavirus, obviously we've all developed many opinions over the last 15 months regarding the virus, but during that 1 to 2 months, to sort of allow other people to carry that burden during that time. Again, I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Blumenthal now, but please, if anyone has any questions after the session, to please go ahead and send them forward to Tammy.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Kirschenbaum. Listening to your presentation reminds me of a famous story they tell about Rabbi Lookstein, who was a magnificent orator, and he once went to an out-of-town community and gave one of his oratorical masterpieces. And after his speech, the young rabbi came to him and said, Rabbi Lookstein, that was a magnificent speech. I wish I had given it. And he said, you will. So I think a lot of what I'm going to say is going to be resonating and repeating what Dr. Kirschenbaum said. But given Dr. Kirschenbaum's status, I feel very comfortable in good company doing that. And I do think I'm probably sort of the transition to someone who really knows what probably most of you on the panel watching this want to know, which is what's the psychological adjustment of kids while they're in camp, while they're far away from us. And probably there are few, if anybody knows as much about that as Kaylie Namdar, who will be following me and who functions as a psychologist very effectively, both in a school and in camp. So she really has that picture. Camp is great, but it's not for everybody. There are some kids, perfectly normal kids, well-adjusted, who will go through life producing, much pleasure and nachas for their parents, who are just not campers. On my experience, most of the kids who do not do well with sleepaway camp are the kids who want that break from scheduling and structure. They don't want to be told they have to go to services at this time and the lunchroom at this time and swim at this time. They really want just to be relieved of a schedule when they're kids like that. And some of the kids who just like their creature comforts, they just don't want to be in the bathroom with daddy long legs crawling around all over the place. So some kids are not cut out, but most kids are. And by today's standards, I think there might have been a time once where camp was just this sort of frivolous luxury or just this treat. Today, camp has become something for those, again, suited for camp, has become something pretty essential. It gives children a lot of independence. They function for themselves and they manage situations without the immediate presence of parents or adults. There's some of you may know some of the research that's come out lately that shows that just being in nature, being in country-like settings already is an antidote to anxiety. There is something very soothing and relaxing about being in nature. Maybe not if a bear is coming over to say Shalom Aleichem to you, but for the most part, it is a very relaxing. My therapy is hiking, and I walk into the woods and I feel my blood pressure going down. So something very soothing and relaxing about that. And I don't have to tell you, the collaboration, the esprit de corps that very much characterizes camp for those who go to religious camps, the collective prayer, the singing, is very inspirational. And many of us for whom camp has been a distant past reference those years. And then, of course, the friendships. There are lifelong friendships that are nurtured by being in a sort of Candyland, in a setting which is all children. So it's pretty important, especially for some kids. Now, the effect of COVID, I think, could go either extreme. I think that being away from camp for many people, some went last year under some special circumstances, but many kids have missed a year. Now it's 2 years since they've been to camp, and that can exacerbate some of the anxiety. On the other hand, that can exacerbate some more of the excitement and anticipation, the joyful anticipation of finally being in camp for so many of the benefits that Dr. Kirschenbaum had mentioned. Also, I think we're all, whereas as Dr. Kirschenbaum pointed out, the actual illness itself seems to be on its way out, or seems to have on its way to being conquered. The residual emotional effects, the residual psychological effects may be just coming out right now. It's in the nature of trauma that very often the psychological sequelae actually only appear when the trauma is no longer there. Because while the trauma is present, you're busy dealing with the trauma. While we're busy addressing, taking the safety precautions, the masks, the washing, the social distancing, this hybrid model, et cetera, we really have the luxury to sort of let it register what this very frightening event has done to us. And Therefore, it may start just coming out now, and sometimes returning to your prior routine is what actually brings it out. Because if you think about it, prior to, let's say, March or end of February to 2020, nobody had a worry in the world about a pandemic. Everybody went on with their lives, were, stood or sat in close proximity to other people, shook hands, kissed, whatever, with no trepidation. And it was at that point that suddenly the rug was pulled out from under us. And maybe going back to that heady times when we did not have these worries may actually now evoke some more of that worry and concern. So let me again just make some pragmatic suggestions of preparing your child while they're still home for camp, and then Carly will take over for once they're in camp. And again, let me reiterate what Dr. Kirschenbaum said. If you're sending your kid to this camp, then you're trusting that camp. It's a mixed message to send your child, whether it's to a school, to a friend's house, or to a camp, when you don't trust that setting to protect your child. And there's nothing worse for children than mixed messages. So by having selected this camp or that camp, you're trusting them to take good care of your children. You're trusting them to have consulted the right medical experts, even if there is some variation in terms of what's being practiced in actuality, what kind of standards are being practiced, as Dr. Kirschenbaum mentioned. But once you've picked that camp, then you trust that camp. And it would be very counterproductive to send your child to this camp and then at the same time either say that they're not being cautious enough, or to imply to them that they're being too cautious. When you give your child a camp, the message to the child is that these camp rules have been well thought out by a place that we have a whole lot of trust in. And first of all, you can go with that kind of assurance. On the other hand, though, you also have to keep to the rules. And I think that's a message that must be given now and will be reiterated in camp. And there has to be a slight differentiation as well. And we do this kind of naturally. We all know that kids break rules. I mean, that's part of being a child. In fact, in many respects, it's beyond the scope of this conversation, but you want your child to misbehave. By children misbehaving, we teach them how to behave. But there's breaking rules and there's breaking rules. So not making your bed in the morning in camp may be breaking a rule. Talking during announcements in the lunchroom may be breaking a rule, but those are kind of rules that you kind of expect your kids to break. But a medical, and especially in the aftermath of the crisis that we've had, not adhering to medical standards, not doing what the camp requires in terms of safety precautions, cleaning, washing, distancing, etc., is not a laughing matter. And when you encourage a child to listen to rules in the subtle manner in which you do it, in your voice tone, etc., make it clear that these are rules, just like there's some other rules in camp that you're not going to follow. You don't leave the campground. You don't go wandering in the woods. You don't leave your bunk after hours. There's some things that are really dangerous. You don't go down to the lake when it's unsupervised. Some things you have to impart as basic safety, and those have a very different sort of qualitative connotations than some of the more, call it, annoyances that children may engage in. It's this for safety, and when you give messages for safety, there's a style, a very effective manner in which you can impart safety messages, and the safety messages can be proper medical care post-COVID, and the safety message, by the way, and I think it's so important that it bears repeating, though it's not our topic, also has to do with unwanted touch or encroachments on one's body, which can occur in camp. And when you give those instructions, you can overdo it or underdo it. You can underdo it if you just sort of say it quickly and dismissively, it won't register. If you reiterate it over and over again with a sense of urgency and fear, you're doing one of two things. You're either creating disproportionate fear, because all of these things that we're talking about are unlikely, or sometimes repeated over and over again, children will dismiss. Children will just sort of disregard it. So the way to impart safety messages, and those are probably the two most important safety messages that need to be given over, is to say it clearly, not with any kind, not frantic, but not with levity and joking either. Say it once, maybe repeat it another time, but not make it an incessant form of communication with your child. Because what children do is, when they hear those messages, they file them away. And it's not front and center on their mind as it shouldn't be, because life isn't that dangerous. But when it's necessary or when it comes up, they can mobilize it. I mean, probably the most common example is what's been part of schools now for over 100 years, which is fire drills. No child is walking around all day worrying about the school catching fire, but knows when that alarm goes off that there's certain protocol that they have to follow. Unfortunately, today we have hazmat drills and intruders, shooting intruders and things like that drills, unfortunate lockdown drills, but for each of them. And the same thing can be true in terms of giving these safety messages to your child. But in the same time, also, please give over to your child the excitement and the joy that's in for them when they're at camp, or the growing experience. They have the physical growing, the psychological maturation. You can impart not only safety, but you can also, and I think it's effective to impart excitement and anticipation. And by the way, know well that what you convey to a child, I alluded to this earlier, sometimes has more to do with your voice tone, your body language, the manner in which you convey it, and the particular words you use. By the way, know your child as well when you're trying to impart a message. There's a very different message you're going to give to a child who by nature is anxious. If anything, your message may be much more to allay their anxiety than you would perhaps to sometimes what we refer to as the dysregulated child, the ADHD child, or just even the child who's the daredevil. The kind of child who is not easily afraid, the kind of kid who there's no tree tall enough for them to climb or roller coaster scary enough for them to go on. These are the kids you might have to more strenuously impart messages of safety and concern because they tend not to want to hear them. Before I hand it over to Kaylie and Namdar, I want to share with you a story that had a very profound impact on me, and I think it's a very good story for parents as they send their children away, as they send their children to camp, as they send their children to college, as they walk them down the aisle at their wedding, when you're sort of parting with your most precious possession, with that which you want to protect the most. But that's the nature of parenting, which is that if you do your job well, they leave you. I know someone who once told me that when she gave birth to her first child, when the nurses brought the child over to her for her to hold the child, she looked at the child and she started to cry. And everybody thought, most naturally, she was just very moved in the fact that she had given birth to a child. She said that wasn't it. She looked at this child and she started thinking about everything that this child's going to go through that she won't know about. And she cried over that there'll be challenges and situations that they're going to face that she may never know about. And that's what she cried over. And I think that's very much of a message, and it's one of the challenges of parents as we send our children for 2 months off into the care of counselors and a camp. There'll be challenges, there'll be situations, there'll be requirements of them, and we're not there to protect them and necessarily guide them, and that's necessary because they will be independent someday, and this is all part of nurturing their independence. And therefore, we have to send them off both with the joy that they have reached this milestone and that they can function on their own, but with that little ache in our heart that we're not necessarily going to be there to totally protect them and insulate them. And so now that we have sent them off to camp, it's my pleasure to hand the podium over to Kaylie and Namdar, who's going to describe to us what it's like for the children psychologically in camp.
Thank you, Dr. Blumenthal. Okay, it's a tough act to follow. My name is Kaylie Namdar. I'm a school psychologist at Hebrew Academy of Long Beach, and I've been in Camp Kaylie as the camp psychologist for about 6 years now. Coming on the heels of color war today in the school where I work, I really believe strongly that things like color war, things like camp this summer are going to be that much more special than they have ever been. Camp is what I like to call the greatest equalizer. You know, children come from all different homes, from all different places. We put them together in a bunk, they figure things out, they learn to get along, and they really, you know, away from their comforts. And even though the camps here in America tend to be much nicer than camps overseas that I've seen. But camp is really a unique place that really allows kids to reinvent themselves away from home, make new friends, try out new things, build confidence, fail forward, really develop social skills. And it allows them to really build friendships that can last a lifetime. I know so many of the students that I work with talk about their camp friends and their school friends, and they come in for their bat mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs, and it's a really, really special relationship that they learn to develop. Also, I want to just say that when kids do well at camp and when they try new things at camp, they often come back to school rejuvenated. And really, summer camp can have such a major impact on kids' lives. And I think that camp really serves, four main roles in kids' lives. It gives them a sense of independence. It gives them a sense of connection. It gives them a sense of purpose. They're learning about Jewish concepts and all kinds of things through informal education. And really, all these activities are infused with so much meaning that it just makes their identity that much stronger. And of course, there's the fun factor too. And kids right now, based on what they've been through and what their families have been through, they need camp now more than ever. They need a chance for them to be disconnected from their technology. They need to experience living life in full 3 dimensions and not having their phones available or their devices available to text someone, to get someone else to come and help them get out of a situation, to block someone. Camp is going to offer them that opportunity to really navigate difficulties and challenges and all the wonderful things that come with camp as well, in their fullest sense, really disconnected from the technology that they've been so reliant on for such a long time. And being in nature and everything, I couldn't think of anything that could be more healthy for our kids now. We have this, instinct. People talk about the flight and fight response when we talk about anxiety, but we also have this tend and befriend instinct where we're naturally drawn to socially interact with other people. And I think that we're feeding that this summer by giving our kids this experience. I really have a strong feeling that our kids are much less anxious about camp this summer than they've been in the past. I've been speaking to a lot of students. I've been speaking to colleagues in other schools. And there was an article recently in the New York Times. It was called "Kids Can Be Homesick and Happy in Camp," that really is projecting less of concern about separation anxiety for the children, but more concern about parents possibly projecting their own fears and anxieties onto their children before they go to camp. So echoing what Dr. Kirschenbaum said and what Dr. Blumenthal said, if you've made the decision to send your child to camp, trust the people that you're sending your child to, whether it's, Camp Kaylie or any other camp that you're sending your child to. Your child needs to feel that you have that trust for the camp, and then they will feel safe too. It's really important that we project confidence, even if we are a little shaky, but if we try to project confidence rather than fear onto our children. And our kids also sense that, your kids have been with you for such a long time. Thank God most kids have been in school, but at the same time, kids may worry about what will happen to you or what will happen when they're not as connected to you when they're away in camp. So if you tell your child that you're going to email or you're going to send letters, maybe it's a good idea to give them an idea of, let's say, how often you're going to do that, and please stick to it. Full disclosure here, one of my own kids, outed me over, how often I said I was going to email and whether I followed through 3/4 of the way, but, I learned the hard way. I wouldn't want you guys to experience that, but we want to normalize homesickness also. You can be homesick and happy. There's actually a book that's been written about it. That's a bestseller at the moment. But summer camp is really a time to build resilience in our children, to build their self-reliance, to build their confidence, and to build their flexibility. And we also, there's a lot of effort that is being put into all camps this summer to really try and look out for the campers that may be struggling, to identify the campers that may be struggling. And again, if you have a concern about your child, please try and contact the camp in advance so they know to look out for your child, and they can be somebody, special looking out for them, even just the counselors, or they can try to pair them up with other children that can help them. Having a friend in camp also that you can turn to and buddy kids up can really, really make a huge difference. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we deal with, children who may be anxious or going through things at camp. Sometimes, there's no like one blanket rule for everything. Every child is different, and we don't want to just rush. If a child comes to us upset, or I'm talking about, when I say us, I'm talking about, the counselors and the division heads. We're really like the surrogate parents for the children in camp. That's how in Camp Kaylie, I know that's how we see ourselves. A lot of camps now have mental health professionals on staff, or many division heads and counselors have a mental health background or have an education background. So people are pretty well versed in how to help your children. But one of the things that we always try to do in Camp Kaylie is first try to connect with the child. When a child comes to you with a concern, you don't want to just say, oh, it's nothing. Everybody goes through homesickness. You'll be fine. Because when you take the time to get to talk to the child and see, what is really going on for that particular child, it might not be homesickness. They might be saying it's homesickness because that's the safe thing to say, but it might be something else. It might be there's a kid in the bunk that's really bothering them and they're struggling with that. Or, somebody sleeping on top of them is just, a very noisy sleeper in the bunk, and they're not sleeping at night. When kids aren't sleeping, they're miserable. We need sleep in order to be able to function. So the first thing is always to just, connect with them before you redirect them to some kind of a solution. And often, validating what they're feeling, empathizing with what they're feeling, that might just be what they need at that point. Another thing is also really normalizing the experience. Every year in and year out, what I find is that campers feel like they're the only miserable person in camp. And even just telling them, you're like the 12th kid that I've spoken to today that's struggling with this. And they're like, really? And I say, yeah, there's a lot of people that are having a hard time right now. So working with them through collaborative problem solving, there's no one solution that's going to work for every single child. Working with them to talk through what's going on after you've validated with them, after you've empathized with them and what they're going through, is going to give them some control, which is what they need. Anxious children need to feel like they have control over things, some control over what's going to happen next. And that can really go a long way. And then continually checking in with them. So if we meet with them, let's say after breakfast, if they're not doing so well, I'll say, you know what, let's try this. And then I'll check back in with you after lunch and I'll see how you're doing. Or I'll check back in with the counselor. And sometimes the kids will come and seek you out to talk to you, or sometimes they'll totally forget about it and they've gone on with the rest of their day. So, every single child is different and every single circumstance is really, really different. I will say it's a great idea for parents to, give your child a flavor from home that they can bring with them to camp, whether it's, photos or pictures of the family they can hang above their bunk, or, something that they like. I once had a camper take his mother's tichel, and it was her mother's tichel and it was sprayed with the mother's perfume and she slept with it. There's all kinds of things that kids can bring with them to camp, some kind of a comfort or something. And again, if you're going to email your child, if you tell them you're going to email them, every 2 or 3 days, do that. Have other people surprise them and email them to other family members. I know how excited they get with that. And the emails you send, try to keep them, as not with like a lot of questions. Are you nervous about this? Or, things that would prime them to possibly feel that way. And if you have, like I said, if you have a child that does tend to get a little bit anxious, and they are in therapy, okay, I tell this to a lot of parents, and I think that many parents come into camp thinking this is not available to their child. Many camps will allow the child to have a check-in with their therapist. It can be via Zoom or via phone if they need to. During camp, it's their safe person that they want to talk to. A camp can make that available to you and your child if the child needs. Another thing that I would say is try to give your child some techniques or some tools to use before they're heading off to camp. I know that in Kaylie, we teach these things to the campers, but give them some relaxation tools and techniques. Deep breathing tools can really, really work. There's belly breathing you can do with them. Don't make the exercises too complicated because it's just going to be hard. There's wonderful deep breathing exercises that children can do that really work wonders. There's progressive muscle relaxation you can do with them that also really, really works great. And one other thing that I was going to say, sorry, is just really trust the people that you're working with and speak to the camp, reach out to them. The camps want to work with parents and, have parents work with their children. But, positive affirmations also work really, really well. If you can develop some mantras with your child that work, that they can use to calm themselves down, to talk themselves through things. There's wonderful self-talk exercises you can do with your kids as well. If they want to keep a journal and, a gratitude journal or just like a regular journal where they can write down how they're thinking and how they're feeling, you can give them envelopes and stamps. They can write you letters and how they're doing, as they're in camp. But sometimes also it's important. Just one more thing I want to mention. Sometimes kids can also just be very overstimulated. And there may be a lot going on, let's say in the lunchroom or in the auditorium or whatever is going on in that particular activity. And allowing a child to know that, if they just need to step out, take a break, talk to someone, or even just be in nature for a little bit by themselves safely, obviously people are supervising them, that's okay too. People go through stages where camp, you're on a lot of the time. There's a lot of activities, there's a lot of stuff going on. You're living and breathing with the same people 24 hours a day. Sometimes a little time out might be something that your child will benefit from too. So send them some books. If they want to listen to music or something like that, they can do that too. But again, I really can't emphasize enough how incredible the camp experience will be for our kids this year. And really, people have called it, the social vaccine that they need after being so plugged in and connected to their technology. So, thank you.
Okay. I just want to say, hi everyone, I want to thank our panelists. That was such great information that you shared, and we've gotten a lot of nice response already. And what struck me most was that Ms. Namdar and Dr. Blumenthal shared a lot of information that it almost seemed like it was going to be a regular camp, regular summer at camp, and that's refreshing to hear. But we have gotten a few questions, and I want to start with Dr. Kirschenbaum. We've gotten several questions about masking at camp. Do you expect there to be masking at camp? What happens if we mask at home and we don't at camp? And just in general, here's a specific question: is should we expect that camp will be business as usual, or that there will be mask requirements once our kids get there? And should we ask for them if they're not there?
Oof.
That's for Dr. Kirschenbaum.
Yeah, I was sort of hoping we wouldn't get such particular questions because they're so difficult to answer. They really are. I like the wording of the questions. I would go into camp assuming business as usual, unless otherwise specified. I didn't want to get into particulars of the different protocols or different camps, but I've had a pretty broad range of different camps depending on where they lie in their safety profile, I think is probably the best way of putting it. And I would say for the majority of camps I've spoken to, it would be business as usual while in camp. And where I've seen the biggest change or variety would be the testing before camp, the testing after camp, and when they leave camp, whether it be on trips or visiting day. That's kind of where I've seen, just as a doctor, local community doctor, speaking to other community doctors, also advising camps on their protocols. That's where I've seen the biggest variability. But while in camp, I'd say it's going to be business as usual unless otherwise specified. So it's a conversation we have to have with our children. Very important. The best question I had in the last, it was about a week and a half ago, a mother asked me, we are a very strict family regarding masking. We sent to schools where it's pretty strict adherence to masking, despite being vaccinated. And she asked me if that's right or wrong. I said, you need to do what makes you feel comfortable as a unit, as a family. Her follow-up question to me was, they're sending their children to a camp where they're not too keen on masking and they don't make it mandatory. Should they encourage their child to continue wearing a mask in such an environment? And I think if you have been listening to the speech until now, the presentation, again, which as a father of multiple children who are sending to sleepaway camps this summer, I was thrilled to get some nuggets of information. I would say for all those advantages that you're going to be getting from camp in particular, that would be sending the wrong message. Once you've decided to send your child to camp, even if you're a masking family, follow the camp's protocols. There's nothing worse than sending a child mixed messages. We want them to be confident while they're in camp and to enable them to flourish over there. There's so many advantages, and in order for obtain and to get as much during that experience, we need them to feel comfortable, confident in what we're doing and what the camp's doing. So I'd say comfortably, I say this comfortably, knowing kind of with my ear to the ground what's going on with corona virus currently, I'd say that I'm comfortable with most camp's protocols, which is while in camp, it's business as usual. I don't say that lightly. I say it with a heavy heart, having been intimately involved with coronavirus for the last 15 months. Yet when I think about the advantages that are coming our way for this, I forgot the word that Dr. Ms. Namdar used earlier regarding with the social vaccine that's coming our way this summer, I would argue that I would not want individual children to walk around with camps. I think that would take away significantly from the camaraderie and the social interactions that we have with one another, kind of breaking those barriers that they deal with the whole year round. It really enables them to sort of flourish. From a medical standpoint, and I'm assuming that's the reason why the question was geared my way, essentially we're creating as best as possible, every camp to their capabilities, creating a bubble, you can say. So while in school, they go to school every day, being exposed to multifactorial infectious disease exposures. And then they return to home, expose those loved ones, get exposed to their germs, then bring it back to school the next day. So if some schools would make it mandatory while in school to wearing masks, I could understand that. In camp, because they're not going home, and it's pretty much an environment where they sleep over, and as much as possible, we're having the staff really kind of stay in camp as well as best as possible. The need for masks is mitigated. Choosing my words wisely, I wouldn't say it's there's no purpose for it. There is a purpose for it. Every little bit helps. When I think of the advantages, sort of we spoke about earlier, that risk assessment, I'd say the benefits of not wearing a mask is greater than wearing a mask.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really complete. And I have the next question sort of touches on something that Dr. Kirschenbaum spoke about, which is, and I think that Ms. Namdar, this might be for you. When kids are in camp together, they talk about everything. And as kids, as they build their friendships, if they, for instance, in this questioner notes that they were very strict maskers, and she anticipates that her kid is going to be in a bunk where family practices were very different. And so can you speak a little bit about how children should approach someone who might denigrate their family's practice, tell them that their family's practice is wrong because their family did something different and their family is right? And I just want to arm my child with some words to kindly come back to a friend that might not agree with our practice.
That's a really tough question. Okay. First of all,
oh no.
Yeah, let me just think for a second. First of all, kids are coming from all different backgrounds when they're in a bunk. And I really think that it's unlikely that, in the camps that we have and where our kids are going, that there will be a camper that is like the odd one out. But you know what? I don't know. So I think that if parents see that their child may be more different in terms of how strict the family is, having a conversation in advance to prepare the child is a smart idea. And really just giving the child an answer that kind of rolls off their tongue, that makes it sound like, there's no need for the child to be apologetic. Everybody's families have different customs, for all kinds of things. This was this family's custom, and this was this family's practice for COVID. People were more strict than others for different reasons, and some reasons people knew about and some reasons people didn't know about. But I think it's wise for the child to say, my family made this decision after consulting with our doctors, and this is what we decided to do. But I'm so happy that now we're in camp, and then just roll on like in a regular conversation and just not make a big deal of it. I think when somebody asks a question like that to a child, especially at this point of the, of where we're at, they could be looking to kind of trip up the child. But if the child just answers it confidently and says, oh, that's what my family did, and that's what our doctors told us to do, and then just goes on and distracts and talks about something else, I think the conversation will just go to something else more naturally.
Okay, thank you. Our time is coming to an end. I think we have time for one more question, and so I'm going to ask this one of Dr. Blumenthal. In this case, you talked about how to speak to your children before you go to camp. My child this person says, my child really wanted to go to camp this summer. I was nervous, but we're sending her because she wanted to go. And I think that my child has already picked up on my nervousness. And can you help me undo some of the things I've done?
I very much appreciate that question, because undoing what parents have done assures me of that I will have livelihood for years to come. So yes, I do appreciate that question. Look, we're human. Just like there's no perfect child, there's no perfect parent. And part of raising children will be for the child to come around and realize that their parents have frailties and foibles and make mistakes as well. And I'm very sure, I don't know who the person who asked the question is, but just the very fact that she could be so forthright and so self-reflective, I'm sure she's doing a lot more good things than harmful things. She's right that if you are anxious about sending your child to camp, but you feel you should work on your own anxiety first. Again, put the oxygen on yourself before you put it on your child, because anxiety is very contagious. People pick up anxiety very quickly. It has to, because if we think about anxiety as fear is safety. The fact that we have a capacity to be afraid of things means that we take precautions and ensure our safety. So we're wired to impart anxiety very easily. So yes, a child will pick up on a parent's anxiety. If it's a teenage child, and if the parent comes to this realization, and again, I commend the parent asking the question for that awareness, you can tell a teenager can more easily tolerate the idea that their parents make mistakes or sometimes have vulnerabilities of their own that they don't necessarily have to take ownership, take on to themselves. And so you can give that message over to the child that perhaps I was anxious and worried, and I hope I didn't give it over to you. To the younger child, the younger child really needs to see the parent more as omnipotent. And it's not a good idea necessarily to admit to frailties, etc., with the child. But young children also are very malleable, very flexible. And if midstream you catch yourself being anxious and think you can go with your child, and you address it and take care of it, and your subsequent messages reflect more self-assurance, they'll adjust and adapt to those messages.
Thank you. I want to thank our panelists, Dr. Blumenthal, Dr. Kirschenbaum, Ms. Namdar, for sharing their expertise with us this evening. It's been really helpful, I know. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. Please remember, when you log out, you'll see a questionnaire. It would really be helpful if you'd fill it out. It's super short, and we hope to see you next time at OHEL's next TheraZoom webinar. Have a good night.